Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Shadi Tabaei, and today I'm going to share some tips and tricks on how you can track ovulation even if you have irregular periods from polycystic ovarian syndrome. If you have PCOS and you've been trying to get pregnant, you probably know how frustrating it is to track ovulation, especially if you're having irregular periods. To help you clear up all the confusion, I'm going to share some tips and tricks I use in my clinical practice that helps women with irregular periods get pregnant all the time. My first tip is to throw out your LH and OPK strips. This is because the LH hormone, or the luteinizing hormone, is very unreliable in women with PCOS. It pulses up and down, and it's hard to know when it's actually up. So what happens a lot of the times is that women will take their LH strips and it comes out positive and then they think they're ovulating, but that may not necessarily be the case. So because it's not a reliable indicator, I definitely think don't waste your money on it and try something else. So that naturally brings me to tip number 2, which is to use methods that are tracking reliable body signals. Here's a few examples. Number 1 is using your basal body temperature. This is essentially tracking your body temperature every morning at your basal or resting state. What you should see is that before ovulation, your temperature is around 36 to 36.5 degrees Celsius, and then after ovulation, it should raise by about half or a full degree to around 37 degrees Celsius and should stay high for about 10 to 14 days. This is a great method to use because body temperature is pretty reliable in PCOS. The second tracking method is to use your cervical discharge. This is by far one of the most important methods you can use because your cervical discharge actually lengthens your fertility potential. Let me explain. Women only ovulate once per month, and that egg only lives for 12 to 24 hours. What lengthens that potential is the cervical discharge because the cervical discharge can give nutrients to the sperm, it changes the pH of the sperm, and it changes the anatomy of the uterus, making it easier for the sperm to actually swim through. So throughout the month, women produce non-fertile discharge and fertile discharge. Non-fertile discharge is very dry in nature. So when you're wiping, you notice that it's very hard to actually slide it. Whereas fertile discharge is very lubricative in nature. And so when you wipe, well, you should notice that it slips and slides. And so after your period, you should have a phase where you have some dry discharge, and then it should become more lubricative and then dry again. This is a really important concept to get, so I've made a full video explaining how you actually go about doing this. But because cervical discharge is reliable in PCOS, it's a great way to actually track ovulation if you do have this condition. The third tracking method is to track your cervical position. So at the end of the vaginal canal, we have something called a cervix, and the cervix has a little hole in it called the os. What happens during ovulation is that this hole opens up so that the sperm can flow through and the cervix comes down so that it's easier to reach. Whereas when you're not ovulating, the cervix goes higher in the pelvis and it's more difficult to reach. Before ovulation, it's very difficult to actually feel your cervix. Whereas after ovulation, what you'll notice is that when the cervix drops, it becomes easier to feel and you should feel something like this. All right, moving on to the fourth method, we're going to talk about cycle monitoring at a fertility clinic. If you can afford this, this is a great option because what they do is they essentially track your cycle with ultrasounds and blood work. So you're monitored throughout the whole month. They see when the follicle is about to come up, and if it's released, they let you know and you know exactly when to have sex. It's costly, but it's a great way to monitor because it's very accurate. Now, if you want to learn more about how to track your cycle using basal body temperature and cervical discharge, check out my 2 videos where I go in depth explaining these 2 things. And watch out for my next video where I'll explain how you can begin to normalize your ovulation with natural medicines. I'll see you in the next video.